Reactive training systems.
I get asked pretty regularly why we don't include more assistance work in our programs. Now, I always think it's interesting when people ask this, because what they mean by assistance work is what I would call, supplemental work, or even further down the specificity spectrum from there. They don't see a lot of assistance work in terms of basically single joint movements, isolation work, work that's much more clearly targeted at muscles instead of movement patterns. So for the squat or deadlift, they're looking for things like glute ham raises, reverse hypers, stuff like that. We typically don't see as much of a request for single joint quad movements, so like leg extensions and things of that nature, which is, I think, just it speaks to powerlifting culture, more or less. They're also looking for things like triceps extensions and direct back work and things of that nature. So the reason I don't include that stuff in our program is because usually there's no time for it. Usually there is some sort of a constraint of resources, whether that's from, whether that's in terms of, a limited amount of time or a limited amount of recovery ability. And we're spending all of those resources on things that provide a better return on investment, basically. Why would you do, a set of, let's say, reverse hypers when you could do a set of straight leg deadlifts or Romanian deadlifts? It's going to have much more transference to your competition exercises that you care about, and it's going to have a bigger impact on your bottom line. Same goes for triceps extensions, same goes for rowing and flies and machine work and all that stuff. Now the single joint exercises may not have quite as big of a recovery demand, but they still have a significant time demand, and the recovery demand is non-negligible. So the way that it affects your resource distribution is something that you have to consider if you're doing a well-designed training program. And besides, at this point in my coaching career, I've become more or less known for some fairly high volume workouts. They're definitely time invasive. Our workouts regularly take more than 2 hours. That's not the only way we can plan training, but that's typical for people that have the time to allot to it. And at the end of a long training session, kind of the last thing that you want to do is to go do some sets of some isolation movement that's going to have a dubious carryover to your competition exercise. Now, I'm not saying that single joint movements and similar sorts of exercises are useless. Far from it. What I am saying is that it's always got to be considered in context. And if you can do another set or another couple sets of an exercise that's going to have a better return on investment, I think that's a better way overall to go. Now, you always have to be looking at the net effect on the competition exercise. You can't, take that to mean that the only thing that you should do is competition lifts, because beyond a certain point in terms of number of work sets per week, number of work sets per session, doing additional sets of the competition exercise doesn't seem to confer additional benefit. And in fact, training a different movement something that has not had the same level of exposure as your competition exercise, can have multiple benefits in terms of your ability to adapt, your ability to generate force, and your ability to improve technique. So training assistance movements, what I would term assistance movements, which are those movements that are closely related to the competition lift but still have something slightly different. So like pause squats or pin presses or deadlifting with chains or something like that. Those are going to get you your highest return on investment. And that's the thing that I would make sure comes into the program right after the competition exercise. And then if there's still additional time and resources available, I would make sure to include some sort of supplemental work. Now, to me, supplemental work are those movements that are more targeted toward muscles and not so much movements, but typically we're still not seeing single joint exercises at this stage. We're seeing things like straight leg deadlifts or lunges or dumbbell benching or military pressing. So there's still multi-joint movements. They just are significantly different from the competition exercise, and they have some sort of area of primary emphasis, a focus, if you will. Typically, after we've covered those bases, there's not a whole lot left in terms of time and recovery energy. But if there is, and you felt that it would be an additional benefit to include some single joint exercises, I'm not opposed to that. It's always just got to be considered in light of what's the best use of your time.
Reactive training systems.